and this is the Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee of the Vermont Climate Council meeting on Friday, April 9th. And we'll call the meeting to order. We'll start the call. I'm going to ask if you're not talking, if you just place yourself on mute. So we can clear your channel here. Okay, so I see Catherine Dimitrick is on. I am on. Is Secretary Curley on? Okay. Chad Farrell came on. I saw Joe Segali came on. I saw Ann Lawless came on. Is Karen Warren on? Okay. Michael Burke is on. Seneca is on. And our newest member, Anna Mejia, is on. And we have several staff support that are on. Just for the record, I'd like to just ask the members of the public that are joining us if you can just announce yourself, and we'll make sure you get on the minutes.
This is Judith Jackson from Irisburg.
Thank you.
Dale Azaria with Conservation Law Foundation.
Thank you. Any other members of the public?
This is Allison Ross, Efficiency Vermont.
Yep.
Hello, Ian Hitchcock, Vermont Natural Resources Council.
No. Okay. And I'll just also note that we have Pat Field from CBI. He is joining us as well. And we'll move right into our first announcements and agenda. Actually, we need to go to agenda first. So the agenda and meeting materials are attached to the calendar invitation. And so today we will be doing a quick update on subcommittee membership. And then we'll spend the majority of our time working through some of the updates to the subcommittee work plan. And then we will, I'm sorry, I have the wrong agenda up, I think. We are also going to have a few minutes to go over the program inventory that will be led by Joe Segali and Stephanie Smith after we discuss work plan development. It's not on the agenda. I don't know why maybe it didn't save when I uploaded it, but would folks be amenable to a quick change to the agenda that's posted to cover that portion?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. And then we'll save public comment towards the end. So with that, a couple of Catherine and I met with Pat Field earlier this week. And for those of you that don't know, CBI is the Consensus Building Institute, are the folks that are assisting the Vermont Climate Council in facilitation, as well as overall management of some of the tasks that we are all assigned. And likely after this meeting, we will be working with Pat to assist with some more meeting facilitation for us, because that'll allow Catherine and I to provide more input as the co-chairs, rather than trying to do facilitation and provide input at the same time. And we think it'll probably make for some richer discussions, so you're not just always listening to us. Catherine, did you want to add anything else about our work with Pat?
The only thing I would add is that he's also acting as a facilitator for the agriculture and I always forget the full name of that subcommittee. But he's also acting as our facilitator, so having that connection will be really helpful to our work.
Yeah. Pat, did you want to just speak up and say hello?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Nice to meet you virtually, and really excited to be working on this project and with all of you specifically, and looking forward to supporting you in every way we can to be helpful to help you come across the finish line.
Awesome. Catherine, did you have any updates that you wanted to provide?
No, the only update I'm thinking of is Chad's volunteer item that he has for us, which is really Chad's update and not mine.
Yeah, so Chad has offered to act as a liaison from our subcommittee to the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee, which will be very helpful, especially because a number of our tasks are dependent on some of the outcomes at the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to him to provide any updates that he'd like to as it relates to their work and how it intersects with ours.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Erica, and good afternoon, everybody. I obviously have sort of been following the charges of the various subcommittees, and I feel like I do have some expertise that could be lent into the cross-sector mitigation committee, especially as it relates to newer sources of energy generation moving forward. And energy management, whether that be storage or software, and then a lot of the connections with the financing world, so as to be able to think about how we're gonna be able to most efficiently, cost efficiently, make this transition. So, and I think it does. There's a nice complement between a few of the charges that we have in our scope with those of the cross-sector mitigation. So I would welcome the opportunity to serve as the liaison, and obviously subject to your all's consideration and approval.
Thanks. I don't think we have to call it to a vote, but does anybody have any concerns or questions about establishing a liaison role to the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee?
No one wants to challenge Chad to a rock, paper, scissors to see who gets to do it.
It's more meetings.
I know. Yeah, I thought about that for sure.
So the other thing I think we could bring up here is that, certainly welcome to subcommittee members who wish to be liaisons to any of the other subcommittees, and kind of establishing similar roles for the other subcommittees. It's definitely encouraged. Just reach out to Catherine and I if you're interested. There's the Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee, as well as Science and Technology, Just Transitions, and I'm missing one. Can't remember. I think there may be another one, but are there any updates that any of the other committee members would like to provide? So one update that actually just came back to my mind is you will probably have noticed that the governor has released a proposal for the utilization of the American Rescue Plan funds. It's about $1 billion that has come into the state of Vermont for a number of categories of work, and one of those is $250 million to address climate change. So there's part where I'm very excited because a part of that proposal is a $25 million state hazard mitigation program meant to mitigate hazards related to climate change. And the proposal is to establish a federal grant matching program for homes that are in the special flood hazard area to assist those property owners with being able to follow through with a home buyout to get them out of danger of flooding, as well as establishing a state hazard mitigation program that would allow home buyouts on a sliding scale based on economic need and risk to those homeowners that are outside of the special flood hazard area, which makes them ineligible for FEMA funding, but still within the flood corridor and at significant risk for repetitive damage due to flooding. So that's very exciting. And it'll also allow for for Vermont Emergency Management to work with some folks to do additional project development for large scale hazard mitigation projects and floodplain restoration projects that could be developed for other federal funding, specifically in the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program through FEMA. We anticipate that the next year's funding for the BRIC program, as it's referred to, is going to be upwards of, this year it was 500, I think it was $500 million. I think next year it's up in the several $billion that is going to be available through that program, because it's dependent on the previous year's total disaster costs. And of course, COVID is a major disaster declaration across the country. So there's a 6% of all of those eligible COVID costs will then be available under the BRIC program. So if we can leverage American Rescue Plan dollars to develop projects for that program, it really leverages multiple federal funding sources to allow us to put forward some competitive projects for floodplain restoration. So all very exciting. That proposal is going to the legislature, and we expect to have some additional discussions about it. And I see Joe Segali has his hand up.
Yeah, Erica, I have a question. So the money that goes into the BRIC, I'm getting a lot of feedback, but the number that goes into the BRIC program, or the money that goes in the BRIC program, would that have to be related to mitigation related to the pandemic, or is it anything? Because I thought BRIC was kind of a broader program.
It's anything. Yeah, so it doesn't have to be hazard mitigation related to COVID or the disaster that the costs were originally incurred in. It can be any hazard mitigation project.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we can move in.
Erica, yeah, I just thought of one more thing. When you said you thought of one more thing, I did too. For those of you who did not get a chance to attend the Wednesday night session put on by the Just Transitions Committee on climate action, justice, equity, and environmental justice, it was really great. And there was quite a bit of conversation about adaptation and resilience. So if you didn't get a chance to participate, it doesn't look like the video is posted yet, but hopefully it will be soon. And I would encourage you to watch the video if you didn't get a chance to participate when it happened.
Awesome. So let's move into our next agenda item, which is membership updates. And I'm very happy to introduce Anna Mejia. Sorry, Anna, I'm terrible with names. So would you like to just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself? And of course, if you're speaking, we can't hear you, you're muted. Okay, maybe we can come back to her. As we discussed in the last subcommittee meeting, she brings a wealth of knowledge through. She's with. Can you hear me now? Yeah, there you go. Go ahead, Anna.
Thanks. My name's Anna Mejia. I am an organizer with the Vermont Relief Collective. I was recommended or somebody introduced me to the Vermont Climate Council work through the Agriculture and Natural Systems. And then I got introduced to your subcommittee, and I'm actually not here to join as a member. I'm here to learn more about your work and see if, if what you're doing is of interest, how I can contribute, and if this is a good match for both of us. I don't like to jump into kind of work when I don't know much about it. So just here to learn more about it.
Don't you worry, Anna. We'll assign as necessary. We appreciate you coming on and talking with us a little bit more. And thanks for that clarification. Okay, so I think we can work into our next agenda item, which is work plan development. And when Catherine and I touched base after the last subcommittee meeting, we noted that it's probably better and more productive use of all of our time to have something that you folks can digest and pick apart rather than trying to kind of create it from scratch. So we have attached an updated draft of the subcommittee work plan to the calendar appointment. And if you want to take a look at that, I'm happy to share it. Catherine, would you mind walking us or talking us through some of the changes and updates that we made? And this is meant to be a discussion, and this is meant for subcommittee members to pick apart and edit. It's just sometimes easier to start with something rather than create it from scratch, like I said. Let me just share my screen here. Okay. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay.
So what we did in our conversations with Pat as well as with Jane is try to add a little more specificity on some of these items in terms of assigning some subcommittee members who could serve in a lead role and for some of these objectives, and really clarify what a time frame might be and get some further definition as to where consultant assistance would be helpful. So if we look at objective 1, we incorporated any of the wording changes that we've discussed in the past, but we really saw for objective 1, based on the conversations thus far, that Joe Segali and Stephanie Smith could act as leads in this objective, with support from many other members of the committee, some that are specifically noted. We were expecting that for the time, in terms of time frame, that the inventory, which are strategies B through D, could be complete by the end of May, with recommendations happening over the summer. We didn't identify any consultant needs for this objective as of yet, although it could be possible that that does happen. And then we just clarified what the outcome would be, like at the end of this process, what the resulting product will be. The other thing we talked about in terms of this objective, and really applies to all of the objectives, is that in terms of strategy A for the necessary public and stakeholder engagement, what we would hope is by the end of April that we would have at least had an initial conversation of what that looks like, recognizing that for some of these objectives, we may not have any necessary public or stakeholder engagement beyond what's happening with the climate action plan, or it may be that that happens much later in our process, but to at least have a preliminary discussion to identify what needs might exist for public and stakeholder engagement. Additionally, I think it would be helpful for us also pretty early to have a conversation about equity and inclusion issues for all of these objectives. So that's a quick summary to the changes to objective number 1. What are folks thinking about what we've laid out here?
Catherine, this is Mike. I like it. Some of the things that I think of, you said outreach. I think a lot of those things that Joe has in the plan already, and things that we may add, all have their own individual outreach going on already. And I don't know how we capture that, or even if we need to. But I think a lot of these programs are already underway and will continue and maybe have outreach already. Just something I thought about.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to consider when we start talking in more detail about what that looks like, because I think you're very right about that.
So the other thing here that we've got others listed here under objective lead and support. So really the intent is that in this area, we would identify Joe Segali and Stephanie Smith as the leads, but obviously as we look at the strategies such as identifying which programs and activities could have co-benefits for reducing GHG emissions, those are things where we would look for support from members under this to be able to add information to the outcomes. So if there are names that we should also put down here, please go ahead and speak up. We can write those down.
Erica, I'm not Karen Horn, I also offered to help. I think she did it through chat last time.
Okay.
Can folks still see the screen?
No.
Okay.
We just lost it.
Hold on.
And also just overall, this looks reasonable to me.
Here we go.
Right. You'll see as we go forward that we put names down based on what we know that people had expressed interest thus far in the meetings. And if we miss somebody like Karen on this one, let us know. And if you haven't yet expressed interest but are just really interested in being a point person or a key lead, definitely speak up. This was just based on what we knew at the time.
So this is Karen. Thank you for bringing that up. And I'll just say, as a general rule, I'm in an internet hole over here in Moortown, and it's mostly not working. So sometimes the chat's the only way to get anything through.
Appreciate your help on this, Karen. Okay.
Anything else on the changes that we made to objective one?
I do have just an overall comment about just the final outcome, which seems like it's the meat of everything that we need to do, which is basically all of the recommendations. So I think as we move forward, we'll see how that goes, because I think that's really going to, even though I just said it looks okay to me, but now I've been thinking through that a little bit. It's kind of like, wow, that's actually, the main task here, I think. I know there's all these other specific objectives which we're going to, go through next, which are, very prescribed in the act. But this could end up being pretty sprawling, and so it may take longer than by the end of May, now that I think about it. But we'll, I think, keep it there as a aspirational time frame like most schedules are, except I know we do have an absolute deadline here, and just we'll see how things unfold, because I really think it's going to require, input beyond this little working group that we have established as well, and reaching out to more people. And this might be a point, where I don't know if it's, where we would want to get some public involvement on, like, after we do most of the work and it's kind of like, this is what we have, is there something that we're missing? Do you have any other ideas, kind of a question? And I don't know if that ends up fitting into whatever outreach is good. I wouldn't want that to be our own meeting necessarily, but so just another, something to keep our eyes on as we move forward.
Great, thanks, Joe. So let's move on to objective number 2, if there's no other comments on objective 1. And I see in the chat that we had one of our members of the public ask if these will be shared. Yes, we will make sure that this is posted on the website. I'm sorry if we didn't get that done yet, but it will be posted on the subcommittee website. So in terms of objective number 2, this one, we are relying on, this one is very much in pieces. So we reorganized the strategies a little bit to follow the kind of 3 parts of this objective. So strategies B and C are related to the greenhouse gas emissions, and I'm reading as we go here, and then D and E are together. So it's hard because this one crosses pages. But if you look at this, we've assigned objective leads depending upon the topic area of this objective.
So because the objective, and this comes really from the charge, as well as from the Global Warming Solutions Act, it is in 3 parts. It's about developing recommendations for how municipalities, and especially rural municipalities, can reduce greenhouse gas emissions and fossil fuel use, understanding and develop best practice recommendations for the protection and resilience of critical infrastructure, and then looking at rural energy resilience, system needs and gaps, and then refining recommendations. So that's why we kind of bunched those in that way. And so therefore, you'll see that the folks that are assigned to those as leads are assigned to the ones that are bunched with.
Yes, and this is the one
Anne,
that,
you're in.
sorry, Anne
Go
and I
ahead.
volunteered to take the work that we had already started and try to use that as to give this context. So yes, which we haven't had a chance to dive into that more, but we will.
Are there any other folks that would like to lend support to any of the batches of?
And Chad, especially thinking with your new role as liaison to the Cross-Center Mitigation Committee, do you see wanting to participate in this objective as something that would be helpful?
Yes. Yeah, I would. Yeah, and I was having trouble with the chat there. So yes, please.
Okay. Great.
Thank you.
And subcommittee members, if you don't see your name assigned to a test, please don't be shy about stepping up and considering being assigned to one. So in terms of the time frame for the recommendations, which are strategies C, G, and E, we really were hoping that we would have those by midsummer. Some of that is related to the work of the Cross-Sector Mitigation Committee, so it may not be done that soon, but I think that's the time frame that they're on as well. Does that seem like a reasonable time frame?
Catherine, this is Dave. Thanks for the lead time.
You're welcome.
You're saying the end of May again? Sorry, I was reading something.
Oh no, midsummer.
Midsummer.
Yeah.
That's better
Which
than
is
mid-May.
which depending yeah. Depending upon your definition of summer, that could mean something different to everybody, but it's a general target.
And I think that's just to point out, any of these recommendations that need to be developed by midsummer are really recommendations to be discussed by the committee, and then hopefully we can, work through them and finalize them, because we expect that that'll be the time frame where there'll be quite a bit of work going on the drafting of the climate action plan, and it's really about integrating those recommendations into that in the way that they're needed to be.
All right, I'm going to move on to strategies 3 and 4, and I'm going to talk about this together because they really do relate very much together. So objective 3 is to develop the Municipal Vulnerability Index, and objective 4 is to develop tools for municipalities. So really objective 3 is the outside world looking in and assessing the vulnerability of communities, people, groups of people, or municipal government community, depending upon how you want to flow through their vulnerability assessments and tools for figuring out these vulnerabilities and what can we do next. So these 2 tasks are ones that we really thought would benefit the most from consultant needs. We were really thinking from a time frame that this would be done by the fall, and that it would really benefit this subcommittee if we could utilize consultant expertise to take the tools that have been developed by GMP, by DPS, by nonprofit groups, and make them apply them to this climate action plan context. And also for Object 3, complete the vulnerability index to feed into the implementation of the climate action plan. Mike, I see you've got your hand up, which I knew you would. Yay.
Yeah. I took it back down actually because I feel like the matrix that we're building does feed this one. So I just wondered if we had the objectives flip-flop there, but then as you continued to speak, you said that we would use that matrix. So I think I'm good.
Okay, great. Yeah, in the discussion that we had with, I think the previous subcommittee discussions, and I've seen the matrix, and I know some others have as well. We thought that that's one of the great things about that is the incorporation of the social factors as well, the social factors of vulnerability, and not just the built and natural environment. So that's definitely a model that I think really spoke to many of the comments we've had from subcommittee members. What are people's thoughts about these two objectives taken together and utilizing a consultant?
I think in terms of once we come up with the matrix, then somebody has to go through and populate it all, right? And right. I do agree that might be something that would be hard for a few of us to try to tackle. I don't know how Anne feels about that.
Yeah, I agree. A consultant would be helpful. There's also, there's a lot of tools that are out there that from national labs and such that may, help us populate our or just develop the matrix or refine the matrix. And I wonder if having a consultant just at the earlier phases might be a little helpful too, to help us refine and look through what's out there that we might be missing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the intent. Is the first phase of this is research and making a recommendation to the subcommittee regarding the appropriate areas to assess as it relates to municipal vulnerability in Vermont, but building on the tools that are available throughout the country. We're certainly not the first state to be looking at resilience and and how to quantify how resilient an entity or even a whole town is.
I do think that this is Karen again, I do think there's a lot of information that towns feel like they've put together already, and in there, this was a concern we had in the legislation. You've already done your hazard mitigation plans and energy elements of your plan, and there's a lot of work that towns feel like has been completed already, and I would hope that that all got included as well.
Yeah, certainly that would go in. Those are important pieces to assessing vulnerability and in terms of the completion of those plans. And you're right, Karen. None of this should be something that is requires something to be developed from scratch.
Erica, at the risk of overextending myself and volunteering for too many things, I'd really like to be part of this one too, this conversation, because I think it relates pretty heavily to the local hazard mitigation plans. More importantly, our next state hazard mitigation plan. I think it'll feed really well into that process.
I'm willing to help out as well. If you need another person, especially if the consultant will do the work. I mean, I'm willing to help out, sort of guide and direct and provide whatever information that we have. I think transportation will be a big part of the index.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And I when we were talking about this, we were envisioning that if we had a consultant to guide us, that it could really be the whole committee providing input and information and guidance, especially since the consultant would be doing the heavy lifting. That would be easier for us to all be providing guidance and support and information. And welcome, Amanda. I see you've joined us. You're a member of the Just Transition Subcommittee, so thank you for joining us.
Happy to be here. Thanks.
Chad, do I see you have your hand up?
Yeah, I don't believe Kate McCarthy is on the call today. But I don't want to sort of nominate her without asking her first, but I'm wondering if we should ask her to contribute to this effort as well. Seems like she would have some really strong expertise in this regard.
Yeah, so actually, thank you for reminding me about that. I did talk with Kate just earlier this week. She is not able to commit to being a member of the council, but certainly, you know, we definitely would be looking to somebody with that expertise. And you know, there's the natural systems piece here. There's the there's water, wastewater. There's the you know, social and vulnerability networks that support, you know, that sector of this. So we would expect to need to consult with folks that are representative of those areas to make sure that the vulnerability index is assessing the whole picture.
Okay.
And then I see Anne and then Anna.
Thanks, Catherine. I'm looking at Objective 4, Strategy C, and I'm just wondering if in the last sentence, in other factors of vulnerability may include funding, time, belief in the need to act, perception of municipal responsibility. I really like all those. Is it also a good idea to throw in capacity?
I think that's a great idea. And that is noted up in the objective as well, which is financial capacity to address infrastructure resilience. But I understand the capacity can go beyond financial and could be the human capital piece of it.
Thanks.
So
Okay.
I'm
Anna,
just saying, Catherine, on this one, we didn't
I
identify.
wanted to ask about what is the intended application of such a tool, and is this like a vulnerability index? What data are you trying to get that you suspect that the towns don't already have? I'm just wondering, like, you would pay, I don't know how much, like maybe $5,000 for a vulnerability assessment, right? And then at least. And just what benefits does that actually bring to the public of having a tool? Is this going to be helping people understand, or decision makers understand, how money needs to flow? I'm just, without understanding the application of this tool, I really don't know whether it's something that I'm in support of.
So it's all of the above, Anna. It's really about the intent of and this came directly from the Global Warming Solutions Act. The intent of the Municipal Vulnerability Index, as I understand it from the folks that drafted the language, was to get a better understanding of the big picture of vulnerability of the municipalities in Vermont, and to do that, to assess them, you know, based on existing data, based on existing capabilities, and have a product that informs policymakers, decision makers about how to direct funding, how to prioritize funding for certain areas of, say, infrastructure that needs to be shored up to ensure better resilience. So in developing the index, we really need to, you know, bring somebody on to help research what is the most appropriate, what are the most appropriate indices in Vermont to drive and determine the level of vulnerability at each individual municipal level. And again, drawing upon data that already exists. So it's not really meant to be something that, municipalities would have to then, another burden for them to take on. It would really be something that is made available to them as a tool for themselves to identify areas in which they can improve in their own individual municipalities, and then at the state level where we should direct investments in terms of overall resilience. We'll see as we go through the next objective, there's also a task for Vermont Emergency Management that would draw upon the outcome of a municipal vulnerability assessment that in the form of a report that would also draw upon local emergency management plans and local hazard mitigation plans. Did I answer your question?
Well, I guess what I would like to see is on this, like some language about, how that tool, the application of that tool. And I just imagine that even if it's made available to some municipalities, they may just feel overwhelmed with like, okay, now I have this, I don't even know how to use it, or some guidance. Particularly, and one of the things that I feel is missing from like all of these objectives is just the grounding on justice and equity. Mm-hmm. And I get that there's a subcommittee that's dedicated to that, but I don't think that really absolves any other committee from incorporating it into their objectives and strategies. And so I guess one of my frustrations with like seeing things like indexes and tools is, as someone who has many marginalized identities, there's so much data available about how climate change, how people of color, people of lower incomes are at the forefront of climate change, and that's already well documented. Do you need more tools to tell you what you really need to do?
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with you about that. And one of the things I mentioned before we jumped into this is I'm hoping that we will have a whole agenda discussion about these objectives, specifically with that question at one of our next meetings. We've talked about it as part of all of the objectives as we've gone along. You'll see some notes here that, we want to make sure that some of this data is included. It's not just about the built environment or natural features, but I think we definitely need to have a specific conversation about that as an intentional conversation at an upcoming meeting, as opposed to just doing it as we go along, which is what we have been doing. And I know that probably doesn't get to every point that you were making, but just wanting to acknowledge that I think many of us agree with the points you're making. And I see Amanda has her hand up, so I'm going to let you jump in here, Amanda.
Hey, yeah, I just wanted to quickly point out, I dropped in the chat a link of a map that the Department of Environmental Conservation is in the process of building in coordination with UVM. And I'm not sure if you've seen that before, and I apologize if this is redundant, but that definitely addresses health vulnerabilities as well as environmental exposure vulnerabilities. And it's probably not as in depth as municipalities would like, and I'm not exactly sure on how deep they're planning on going with this map, but something as a starting point you might be able to use that I just want to bring to your attention.
Thank you very much. I'm looking at it in the chat. Yep, there it is. Great, thank you. And thank you so much, Amanda and Anna, for bringing those up. as we go through these objectives, because I want to make sure, I agree that we have a responsibility as well. We can't just say we have a Just Transitions Committee, so that's nothing we need to think about. That's not our goal. I'm looking at the time as we're talking and recognizing that we want to leave some time for Joe to be able to present what the inventory is.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Erica.
The last two objectives are, they haven't gone through much change, but these are also from the Global Warming Solutions Act, which is recommending a means of securely sharing self-identified vulnerable residents information. Specifically, in an emergency, there's a program that exists for that. And so the strategies around here are inventorying methods used by other jurisdictions, and then developing a recommendation for modifications to the CARE program, specifically to include outreach and educational, just to expand that program. It's a great program, but we would certainly want to make sure that there were more self-identified individuals as a part of that program, and that local and state emergency responders know how to access that data and utilize that data to save lives during an emergency. So VEM is the objective lead here. We would be working with the E911 team, because that's where that data lives. And then the time frame would be fall 2021. And then we're just going to bunch up the second one. The last one is the Vermont Emergency Management Biennial report. That will draw upon local emergency management plans and hazard mitigation plans, as well as the municipal vulnerability assessment on a continual basis on an every other year timeframe. That's a report that would come back to this subcommittee to take a look at, and would generate future recommendations for policies and/or funding needs that arise from that biennial report. Just subcommittee members, just let me know if there are any other items or staff that would like to support on either of those. I'm happy to add your names to that. These are the last one especially is kind of an ongoing, fall 2021, but then it's a repetitive process for the years to come.
And certainly subcommittee members, if you have comments or suggestions about this after this meeting is over, feel free to send them to me directly, and we can make note of them, not only for this document itself, but just starting to make notes on some of these objectives, that making sure we capture these conversations and thoughts that you might have outside of this conversation. Because our hope is to start diving into these in a little more detail in our coming meetings. And so having that baseline for the people's ideas to start with will be great. So that being said, I think we can move on to the next item on our agenda, which is to get from Joe an overview of the inventory that has been started to meet our objective number 1.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen, which for some reason, I don't know why I can't see where to do that, even though I work with teams all the time. Oh, there it is. Okay.
Yeah, there you go. Right next to your mute button.
Yeah. So this is an inventory which a bunch of us in state government developed kind of at the start of this back in October or November, when we were just trying to get organized, start thinking about how to get ready for the Climate Council, and leadership asked us to get started. So it's very preliminary, and it really does need the benefit of others' input from outside of state government and thinking about how to structure it, but also how I think to populate it and to gather the information that's going on. So can you guys all see the spreadsheet?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So there's really two major parts of it. There's descriptive information about the program or activity, and then there's some categories of performance that maybe we should think about, and kind of just try to walk through these pretty fast. Obviously, description is description. The related climate change threat, this is something that I just added recently, and just to kind of give you a quick overview, there's about 50 or so actions in this inventory so far, and you can see that, you know, by far most of them are the extreme weather events. There's a few for cyanobacteria blooms, and then there's some that address multiple, and there's some I wasn't really sure why they're on the list, but we'll figure that out. But you can see that, you know, at least for what we have now, which granted is mostly state government and federal, it's a little bit of federal, is that there's quite a few of these threats or consequences of climate change that are identified in the Act, which so far we haven't identified anything that's addressing these. And so this is in a way like a very first cut gap analysis of maybe what we might be missing. So then there's the activity type. So again, just to summarize these, I'm not doing this for every one of these categories, but just to give you a sense of the kind of actions that we're looking at. So things like planning, policy, regulatory, data, education and outreach, operations, and then specific projects. And I'll say that most of these, you know, again, if you think about the previous chart, are related to extreme weather, because, you know, we all came out of Irene, and it's been a huge focus for us for the last 10 years when it comes to thinking about climate change and how to be resilient, right? So most of these are related to flooding more than anything else. And, you know, the projects are lots of things that that VEM is funding. It's things that the Agency of Transportation is doing, and others. And, you know, a lot of the planning are things that ACCD is supporting and that we're supporting. And so we'll have to think about, are these really useful and the kinds of things that we want to be thinking about or not? But you could kind of see structuring our recommendations around these areas as well. The sector that they're impacting is, we just have 3 general sectors at the moment. So the natural environment, services, which really is about people, and then the built environment. And, you know, the built environment and natural environment could probably be broken down a little bit more. Certainly the built environment into, you know, transportation infrastructure, water, wastewater, utilities, telecommunications, things like that. But this was really just the first cut at it. So other things like, is there any budget allocated to this? You can, and part of it, there's lots of blanks because the information wasn't readily available as we pulled this together. Organization type. So again, this is mostly state, a little bit of federal, and you want to think about non-governmental organizations. The private sector absolutely needs to be, you know, included on this. Municipalities, regional organizations, etc. Name, department. If there is any related regulations or you know, statutory authority, it's kind of good just to note that. And if it's underway, who the lead is and what the status is at the moment. And we may want to generalize that a little bit into, you know, it's ongoing, it's just being developed. We can think about that. So, and then this section here is performance, and it kind of comes out of what the Act was asking us all to do. And these are just general categories. So adaptation, resilience, effectiveness. And our first cut at this was just thinking about it in terms of, you know, there's a definition for adaptation and a definition for resilience in the Act. And so these categories of, does it improve the ability to recover? That's part of the adaptation definition. And then these other 2 are part of the resilience definition, which is, does it reduce vulnerability, and does it increase capacity to withstand? And, you know, I'm only bringing up the definition just to kind of, you know, let you know that this came from someplace. It wasn't just kind of pulled out of thin air. And really, these things all together, I would always say, are about resilience, but that's just how the Act has kind of put them, you know, has defined them. But sometimes, you know, effectiveness, this is maybe where we want to get a little bit of advice from consultants, is like, what's the best, you know, what does it mean to be, how do you measure resilience effectiveness? This is really just talking qualitatively about what the purpose is of each of these things. does it improve does it reduce vulnerability or whatever, right? But it doesn't say anything about how well it does it. And we may, have to just live with the fact we may not be able to measure these things. There's always like all this promise for performance measures, and then there's, when you get down to the nuts and bolts, there's the reality of it, and are the data available and all that kind of stuff. And then cost effectiveness, again, you won't see any information there yet. It's the same challenge, if you improve resilience by 9 out of 10 points, that's great, but if it costs $100 million, how do you sort of do that benefit to cost ratio? And then co-benefits is something we've been talking about as well, just kind of identifying those. And then, I think the last two maybe get a little bit, but probably not far enough along in thinking about equity and, justice and all of that, which is, equity in terms of rural community impacts. And that's not the only, dimension of equity, but that's one of the dimensions that's talked about in the Act. And then just low income or marginalized communities, do they, I was in the Wednesday session, it was really good, but it's really about, are the benefits shared proportionally as well as the impacts of whatever sort of actions that, we're taking. So that's a lot to figure out, all of that. And I sort of see that working group probably focusing first on the description part of it and gathering as much information as possible. And then the performance part, thinking a little bit about, how do we approach this? Does anybody have any specific ideas? Or I also think this vulnerability index might, sort of swing back into this somehow and inform this as well, if it's ready. Or this might be used for prioritization. At some point, I imagine we're gonna have to be thinking about how do we prioritize? We're gonna identify gaps, and it's like, we need to do X, Y, or Z, but what's most important? And maybe this performance part of it can sort of help, figure that out. Somebody, I can't remember who asked the question, was it Amanda or somebody else, about, what's the point of, why are we doing these tools and these indexes? And I was asking the same question. I mean, partly it's like, well, because the Act tells us to do it, that's a little bit of the answer to that question, but it still means, I think it's up to us to figure out what we want to do with it. And, maybe that index can sort of inform our, ranking of what actions are most important and what we should be working on. So that's it in a real nutshell. And glad to answer any questions. And again, I expect this to change and hopefully improve as we move forward.
Thanks so much, Joe. This is really just meant to show the subcommittee really the launch pad that we're starting from with this work, which is really the crux of Objective 1 in the work plan. And so now that he's shown you some of the stuff that's already underway, you may end up getting more help, Joe.
Okay.
Because it's
Yeah,
really and it's really good work.
This is Mike. Just Joe's thought on what are we going to do with the matrix in the project list. And, in where I live every day, we actually create these and use data to decide where to go pay attention to and invest in first. So where I see it as an incredibly valuable tool to help us become more resilient and not just data to be out there. And the other thing that made me think of your project list, Joe, is, we can probably use this to help bring together different agencies that affect what we might do with this in the future. So A&R, the Act 250 commissions, and try to get to a place where we're all rowing in the same direction, based on the mutual benefit in the end. Because right now I do feel like some of that is disjointed. So your list made me think of, wow, maybe we have an opportunity here to bring everyone together. And, you might, in the performance, it made me think of, are any of the things that we're proposing, do they have a negative, right? The environmental justice side, and maybe that has to be listed, and maybe that can help some of these other agencies get on board more. Maybe that's not the right term, but I really like that list along with the matrix, and I think we're doing this to be able to bring things forward and get things done. That's what I'm here for anyway. Thanks.
Mike. Anna's got her hand up.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to say that it's not that, like, you know, I'm against data. It's just in the community that I live in the state that I live in, there has been continual data showing how racial minorities, or I don't even want to say the word minority, but that's how we are treated in Vermont. If you look at the COVID pandemic, even though there is data showing that BIPOC communities are higher vulnerability, it took a lot of organizing in order for the state to finally say that they were going to prioritize them in the vaccine. So the communities that I live in, I do not feel that that even when the data is there, that the decision makers actually take that into consideration when making their decisions. And so I have little trust that a tool would actually help get there. And I also want, even with like the data showing in existence, as I said, of people of color, low income being disproportionately impacted by climate change, the legislator of the Vermont Climate Council, how many people of color were part of the actual membership. So I just feel like there's a long way to go. And even in the face of data, I'm not seeing it translate into action.
You know, that's a good point. I think as we look at the inventory, I think that's a good comment to bring to the group in how that translates into our recommendations. We may want to look at assessing that portion of it right up front, so that it can color our recommendations.
Erica, I can't hear you. I don't know if others can hear. No? Okay. It's not just me.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't usually have that issue.
Are you rolling away from your mic?
Maybe I was just what I was saying is, you know, maybe that's a good comment for the group that's doing the inventory to take into consideration as you're looking at the programs. And so anyway, that's all I was saying.
You know what, I guess I would ask that, how can we do it better? And you know, help us figure out how to do it better, because the data may not ask all the right questions, or you know, cover it adequately. So how can we structure this in a way that it does it? And sometimes maybe that means it's not just about the data. I mean, that's why we have a working group here and a committee, is to talk through the things. And you know, that's maybe you know, the data kind of helps you get some information, but you don't stop there. You bring in your own personal experience and observations, and we build that in somehow.
Thanks. So I gotta note that we are over time, and I probably need to extend these meeting invites, especially as we get into the more in-depth work of the subcommittee. The whole intent here is that the work plan that you all saw will be finalized, and we'll send it out for any additional comment or clarification that's needed to the subcommittee members. We'll ask that you reply with your comments, not to all, just back to Catherine, so we can incorporate them, and do one quick check at our next meeting to make sure that it's in a good, at least final for now. It's definitely something we'll have to revisit as our work continues. But I think we can all agree that we really want to get into the meat of the work, which is why we're all here. So thanks very much, Joe, for going over that, and thanks for all of the discussion today. I want to make sure that we leave a few minutes for public comment here at the end of the meeting. If there are any members of the public that would like to chime in, please speak up. Just let us know who you are and who you're representing, if anything.
Hi, everyone. This is Ian Hitchcock from Vermont Natural Resources Council. Am I okay to offer a few quick comments knowing we're over time? Awesome. Thanks,
do.
Erica. I wanted to start by kind of echoing and appreciating the perspective and sense of urgency that I feel like Anna has really brought to this conversation. I have had similar observations just personally of, Vermont as a place where we are very strong on planning and sometimes not as strong as we want to be on implementation. And I feel like the very passage of the Global Warming Solutions Act by the legislature was an acknowledgement of that as regards to climate action, that like we have had good climate goals for a while. We've had a variety of great programs and they haven't been going far enough to make reality come at all closer to our aspirations. And I think that's true for, economic and racial injustice in our state as it is for, carbon reduction metrics. So I appreciate that being kept in mind and folks thinking, always about the implementation side of things, that how do we make these things real? Because I think ultimately that is why the legislature passed the Global Warming Solutions Act. And I very much appreciate that being brought to the fore, particularly as it pertains to existing inequities. And then quickly, I would also like to say on this notion of public comment and public engagement, I'm very excited to hear, that folks are feeling supported and things are moving there. I will just note that I work with a lot of energy committees from around the state, and folks are kind of chomping at the bit to lend their feedback to this group, not necessarily just in response to what you all produce, which I think I very much welcome and folks would love to do, but I definitely know there are folks with, expertise and ideas around, even the lived experience of inequities or challenges when it comes to accessing things in the rural context in particular, who would love to have a chance to offer that input to the council in a way that can help inform the development of these plans kind of as they're in their nascent stage and not just in a kind of response to what you all develop. So I just offer that for further consideration, and thank you for the time.
Thanks so much, Ian. Great comments. Any other members of the public that would like to add comment today? Amanda Carlson.
Hey there. I just wanted to voice that the Just Transition Subcommittee, one of our big tasks is the public engagement piece. And most of us sat in on this environmental justice workshop that happened a couple of nights ago. I think Joe had said that he was there. But some lessons learned from that we took away were kind of going to people versus asking them to come to us. So we found it really relevant what they brought up about them going and knocking door to door, however that might look for the Vermont Climate Council, especially in the time of this pandemic. We don't know, but our intention as we develop our public engagement strategy is to have participation of people who are not usually at the table, at the early stages of the process. So we are just starting to have a breakout of a sub-working group for public engagement, and that's going to be very much part of our strategy, is to engage people now to be at the planning table versus passive recipients. So I just wanted to share that, and we welcome any members of this subcommittee to come and join us. We meet Thursdays 4 to 6 p.m. and or we're always open to an email suggestion or any of the above. And I will leave my personal email in the chat if anyone wants to get in touch. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. Anna, you still have your hand up. I just want to make sure you don't have another comment. Okay, and any other members of the public have any comments? Okay, folks, it was noted in the chat that we did not refer to the minutes and past minutes from the last meeting. If you don't mind, I'm going to defer to the next meeting and we'll do 2 meeting minutes at the same time. Because it sounds like also based on the chat, maybe the link in the agenda wasn't working for the minutes. So we'll get that squared away in the next meeting. meeting agenda will have a link to both sets of minutes, so you can take a look at those. We'll look at those at the next meeting. The intent for our next meeting is to dive into some of this work. We may look at extending some of these meetings because we definitely don't want to stifle the conversation that's really relevant and important. So be on the lookout for that. Also just trying to be cognizant of folks' time and recognizing that we've just identified some task leads for these objectives. And so that will result in some work outside of the subcommittee meeting that we'll want to hear back on during the subcommittee meetings. Okay, are there any parting comments or questions from the subcommittee? Okay, enjoy what looks like it's going to be a beautiful weekend. So thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.